Should I see the record?
It should be recording. Yes.
See, that's trouble with that request. I appreciate it, John. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Um, Zoom. I feel so out of shape with Zoom sometimes. So can everybody see the PowerPoint that I'm attempting to share here? Cheers. I can see you all. I got the two. I got at least I got the two screens going. I got the PowerPoint on one, and I got all of your lovely faces on the other. Because this is Zoom, and like I say it to everyone, I guess. We invite you to turn on your cameras, but of course, we understand if you, for some reason, don't want to share your screen or like have something going on in the background. Or Dr. Duran already told me that my internet, if I'm choppy, you got to tell me because like I might be choppy this morning. I might have to turn off my camera. So it's good to see everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Michael Chaness. I work in anthropology and Native American studies, and I'm gonna pass it to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Duran, to introduce herself and get us going this morning.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Celinet Duran. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Criminal Justice. I am also the faculty resident mentor for the Be First LLC, which is the LLC through Res Life Living Learning Community that is focused on our first generation students. I myself am a first generation student, and that informs a lot of what Dr. Hannes and I will be discussing here today. I also apologize in advance because I'm getting a little bit sick. So I'm sorry for the sniffling. It's that time of year, you guys get it. And Happy New Year. Oh, I guess am I starting?
I can ask you a
Yeah.
question if you want,
Yeah.
but but yeah, I think you should be the one who starts.
So, today, Dr. Hannes and we spend a lot of time steeped in the language of things and what that means for us, not just within our research, not just within our own personal identities, but how that comes across in the classroom. Me, for example, a little background on my career trajectory. I received my PhD and also my undergraduate degree from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which is a very traditional criminal justice program. I did not know that it was a very traditional criminal justice program. At the time, I was very heavily steeped in it. And because of how this program is rooted in the historical context of the criminal justice system, the criminal legal system, there are things in my training that I wasn't aware were rooted in toxicity, were rooted in harmful language, especially in working with folks who are themselves justice impacted. And it wasn't until I got to Oswego where I started recognizing, even though before coming here, I have worked predominantly at minority serving institutions. John Jay College is itself a Hispanic serving institution. The student demographic population for the undergraduate program at John Jay is, when I was there, was around 45, 46%, which is very, very, very high for an institution of higher learning, but makes sense based on where it's couched within the city and how close it is to different ethnic groups. But it wasn't until I got here that I started recognizing how in my training, I keep perpetuating the same stereotypes that I am working on dispelling, especially for students who they themselves have a very limited worldview in terms of their upbringing, in terms of their interaction or limited interaction with folks and groups that are so different from their own. And it wasn't until I got here that I had the opportunity of working with colleagues like Dr. Hannes, like Dr. Hurtado, like Dr. Radhakrishnan, where I did not recognize that the language that I was using directly contradicted the messaging and what my work and research was premised in. So when Dr. Hannes and I were talking about what we were going to do for our CELT session, I think especially in this particular moment where we're couched socio-politically, when we see how the language of things really matters, that I felt it was really important for us in our respective studies, him being the director of the Native American Studies program, me working with so many non-white students, marginalized students, and marginalized groups, that we decided it would be really important for us to really understand how language can not just shape our interactions in the classroom, how it can shape our interactions with our students, with our colleagues, but what that means for how it's seeped in our work.
I think my video's not great already, so I apologize. Um, and I just have a few comments to make before I talk about my specific area uh, of expertise. And that's one is it's always a pleasure to work with you, Dr. Duran. Just even chatting last night, like what we actually started doing was planning each other's lectures. Like that's not what we're going to talk about today, but we're like I used to do this and I think it would work for you. Like, well, I used to do this and I don't do it anymore and I think it would work for you. And it's eye-opening every time and we have to try and keep ourselves on track in order to produce a Celt presentation as opposed to just talk about how we're going to make our own classes better next semester. And so it's a real honor to continue to work with you. And my friends at the Onondaga Nation, for their leadership, they say something like their leaders need to have skin that's 7 layers thick. Uh, I see Paul and Ramin and Dr. Croy. Like maybe that makes sense to you. Like Liz, leadership has to have skin that's 7 layers thick, which means that you can't be easily offended, first of all, and also you need to be able to do the things that are right for the entire group, not for yourself, not for your family, not for your clan, but you need to be able to do the things that are best for the entire group. And there's not many things that will make that more clear than teaching and especially years of teaching, experience in teaching, how to make your skin 7 layers thick and how to cultivate an environment that is best for the group, not for the individual, but for the entire group. And I don't know whether these occurrences have happened at the 1 foot level or like the 5,000 foot level or the 30,000 foot level. Something's happened at the 1 foot level, but I analyze them on the 30,000 foot level. So I've had these collection of experiences that is really driving what I'm going to say today. And I'll bet a lot of you in this two-dimensional weird Zoom brick space have had similar experiences. One is hearing a student, not when they're studying for the exam, but maybe when they're speaking in public or maybe years later. But hearing a student who you taught mistake or incorrectly repeat what you have taught them. It's you're getting some of the words right or some of the knowledge is there, but because maybe you in my case because maybe you've only learned through books so far, you only have this one component of the information or you only have this one component of the knowledge, so what you're repeating is not really correct. I know where you learned it from me, but it's not really correct. The second, and this one kind of haunts me, I'm not going to lie, is hearing from a student a variation. I don't know exactly what you've heard before. I've heard them all. But hearing from a student some variation of, you hurt my feelings, or you laughed at me, or you made others laugh at me, or, and I think the most general one, you made me feel stupid. Some variation of those comments, of those critiques from students. Again, I started this by saying we have to have skin that's 7 layers thick. So I am going to be honest about the things I've heard or the feedback that I've gotten. Finally, and this one doesn't haunt me, but this is the real impetus behind uh, the rest of my comments today. When you haven't had a student in a while, maybe a year or two has passed from when you had them previously. And maybe they come to office hours, or you see an email from them, or maybe they enroll in another one of your upper division courses a year or two later. This is something that often happens with me. And they remember with 100% accuracy, perfectly, every word you've ever said, every joke you've ever made, and every piece of analysis that you offered to them. And that they banked it, that they compartmentalized it, that they listened to you so intently that years later they can reproduce exactly what you said. That's the moment. That's the moment when I know, I don't think, but I know that they remember. And for me, it wells up in me a sort of a crushing sense of responsibility that I can only compare to when I had children for the first time. And I didn't feel an overwhelming sense of love for my children when they were born. I felt an overwhelming, crushing sense of responsibility. And the love came later, you know. But these three experiences, and I've seen variations of them over the years, like these three experiences and these three responses from students. Um, I tell my students I never want to be the professor that you remember because professors cause trauma, or teachers or professors, they cause trauma, and they cause very bad experiences to last a lifetime. I have those from my education. Maybe you do too, of not learning to teach from good examples, but learning how to teach from bad examples. Like I'm never gonna do that. I'm never gonna act that way. I'm never gonna teach this way. And I guess that adds to my 7 layers of the thickness of my skin was negative experiences that I had along the way throughout the educational system. So when I know, not when I think, when I know that that I am a professor, or that I am an instructor, or that I am a teacher that students remember, that really motivates me more than anything else to excellence. That I know that the people that I'm going to talk to on a day-to-day basis are going to remember what I say. That is that's that type of crushing responsibility that I'm trying to reference here. Many of you have, probably not many of you, but I know that some of you have seen. I'm going to try to turn my video on. Tell me if please tell me in the chat if my audio goes bad. But a lot of you have seen this list before. I can remember Liz for sure. You you've seen this list, and you participated when I in a Celt session I led on terms and terminologies. And I'm not going to reproduce that. But just like Dr. Duran said, um, I'm gonna add that terminologies matter. Like how we talk, how we go about our business, how not just how we move, but how we openly address the types of terms and terminologies that we're using and setting down in the classroom. Oh, it isn't. Thank you, Dr. Ryan.
So Michael, I just thought I should add that I've had some of those experiences. I don't know if anybody has ever remembered everything I've said, but certainly many things I've said. But I've also had people who think I said something 40 years ago, which I'm certain I didn't. One of their 40 faculty said it, but because of their relationship with me, they kind of attributed that to me. But I am pretty certain it wasn't me. And I'm really talking 40 years ago. I'm not talking about like last week or last year. So I just wanted to add that fourth possibility where somebody is really convinced I said something, and I'm really certain I didn't.
No, Ramin, I appreciate it for sure. To me, that is a subcategory of the first, hearing students misstate, and it's not students in your case, but hearing students misstate what you have taught them. But yeah, misstate what you have said or attribute to you something that you haven't said. Yeah. I hear you for sure. Dr. Duran, is the PowerPoint showing again?
Yep, all good.
Cheers. So, Dr. Duran talked about how labels matter a little bit, and I think she will again. But terms and terminologies matter a lot. And if you want to hear me talk about me and Liz and others talk about these terms and terminologies, there's a Celt talk I gave called "What Do They Like to Be Called?" And I used to introduce this to students, either class 2 or class 3. I now wait till the middle of the semester. I now wait till about week 8 or week 9 in order to introduce this list to students, because a number of years ago, um, it normally creates a huge discussion that lasts the entire class, when we start talking about which of these terms do they prefer, which of these terms are inappropriate, which of these terms are appropriate. But I had a group that they just paused. It was too much. This was too much on day 3. And this was a smaller upper division course. They didn't know what to do with the list because they didn't want to talk about any of them, because they didn't want to be, I don't know, I can't fill in the blank. They didn't want to be wrong. They didn't want to be offensive. They didn't want to be inappropriate. They didn't want to engage. They didn't want to learn. They were just too scared, too put off by the list. So I now incorporate it at the midterm, when y'all have been talking about whatever this category is now for 8 or 9 weeks. Now let's discuss why all these specific terms and terminologies exist, what our authors have to say about them, what I have to say about them, and what my experience is being with Ongwe people, or being the only non-native person in a group of native people, and knowing how they refer to themselves in private. But, that is an interesting conversation, but we've already done it. I want to talk about these before I kick it back to Dr. Duran with oh no, I have another slide. I'm going to talk about these before I get these and one other thing before I kick it back to Dr. Duran. And that's students today, because of buzzwords in our political discourse, in the assault on higher education, right? These words: settler colonialism, white supremacy, anti-Indian racism, words that other instructors and other professors can't use. Types of assignments, types of readings that others instructors cannot use. I focus on them from day 1 to day 7 to day 15 in order to give students context, which I think they're sorely lacking, especially if their knowledge comes from this kind of, bifurcated contemporary American news media and politics, that they hear the buzzwords, they know the buzzwords, they don't want to be wrong, but they lack context for understanding these terms and terminologies from an academic or intellectual point of view. Dr. Duran and I were talking about this last night. Just this idea of settler colonialism. a colonialism that is based on land, that is based on the constant consumption and accrual of new lands. So the settler colonial experience of Ungwe Hungwe people is very different than the type of colonization experienced by, now we're talking about Indian people from South India, from the Indian subcontinent. Very different than British colonialism in India in the 18th and 19th centuries. The Both of these are colonialism, but one is based on maximum economic exploitation with minimal social interaction, and the other is based on removal, replacement, and accrual of land dispossession. White supremacy is another. That students don't really understand what this word means, who has defined it historically, and how it is appropriate to talk about the roots of white supremacy in American religion and government and politics. But they get real standoffish at first. If you just use the terms, the buzzwords that they've heard, or the controversial ideas that they have learned about in social media, more or less, this is their the basis of their news and media consumption. If you use the terms without explaining them explicitly and without delving into them deeply, then I have noticed more in the last 5 years, even more in the last 3 years, even more in the last 1 year, an ability to tune out, an ability to just not engage, and not engage in things that they're ignorant about. And I mean ignorance in the true sense of the word, that they have no knowledge of. So instead of being curious by what they're ignorant by, instead of being wanting to ask questions when their ignorance is exposed, this I don't know what you want to shelling. It's like cocooning intellectually and emotionally. I teach another course here at SUNY Oswego called ANT 120, and it's Introduction to World Religions. And this is what I think is a Banksy graffiti in Tel Aviv. I'll start there. You say Tel Aviv or Jaffa. You say Israel or Palestine. You say Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, the city of peace, or Al-Quds. You refer to areas as settlements or occupied territories. You refer to physical space as the Kotel or the Dome of the Rock. That's the last remaining inner courtyard of the Western Wall, and the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You say mosque or masjid, right? Like when you enter into another people's place, when you enter into another people's religion, when you start learning about people who are different than yourselves, you have to know that you enter into an already politicized and already existing framework. The words you use, the words that you choose to use, will betray where you come from, will betray your knowledge base, will betray what side of the fence you stand on politically, economically, socially, religiously. So when I talk about areas of the globe, or when I talk about Race and racism in the United States. I try to be as open and honest with the students concerning where the terms and terminologies come from that I introduce them in the classroom because I know they're going to remember and I know that they're going to repeat them. And Ramin, we have to do everything that we can, yes, to make sure with the knowledge that they're going to remember, with the knowledge that they're going to repeat them, then we better be doing everything that we can to ensure that what they are going to be repeating makes them sound like sensitive, intelligent humans who are able to contribute to living in a democratic society. Dr. Duran, this question came up last night, and I do want to ask you, um, what type of, like, I think we've both been teaching, full time for like 10-ish years. What type of language, um, what type of language have you changed during your teaching career? And is there anything in particular in the last year that you have seen a change, either in the language that you use or in how our students are engaging?
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate the way that Dr. Hannes is able to be so honest in the classroom with his students in a collegial sense and what that means in terms of how the different ways that we can interact. Um, I spend a lot of time with my students. I'm very similar to how Dr. Hannes is very honest with his students. I'm very honest with mine to the point where when I first started teaching the race and criminal justice class at SUNY Oswego, the first words that came out of my mouth was, yes, I am the DEI hire. Because those of you who are familiar with my trajectory here understand that I am first here because of a fellowship through the Prodigy Fellowship, which is meant to increase diversity, equity, inclusion within departments that needed it. I'm very honest when I tell them because these words that, especially in the last year, so this idea of DEI, I think those of us here can agree, has been used as a misnomer to attach incompetence, to attach that I am not deserving to be here because I simply got this job based on the color of my skin or what gender I identify with, or my sexual orientation, or where I was born, or where I come from. And the very first thing that I tell them is, while I am here because of this fellowship, I will now spend the next 5 to 10 minutes explaining to all of you how I had to fly where someone else could have possibly just crawled their way there. And why we are at a crossroads now where it is our responsibility to not just live in the language, but really understand what that language means. My first interaction of recognizing that I was being complicit in language that does not move the conversation forward was I had a student who was justice involved previously. And typically when we speak about folks who have been previously incarcerated, it is very common for us to use words like felon, ex-con, because that is the popular discourse in the language. That is how people understand it. But that student came up to me after class and said, I would really appreciate it if we didn't talk about people who have a criminal justice record as being a felon, because that assumes that I am still living in that truth when that is not my entire identity. That was a consequence of something that I did, and I was held accountable and responsible for that consequence, but that is not who I am now. And that was the first time where I said to the student, and it's what Dr. Hannes was saying of, you always remember how you make a student feel. Like the words from the great late Maya Angelou. They might forget your words, they might forget what you said, they might forget how you said it, but they will never forget how your words made them feel. And after that moment, I was very intentional in when we're speaking about folks who have been through the criminal justice system, I do not refer to them as felons. I refer to them as returning citizens, because when you're coming back from having been incarcerated, that is what you are. The vast majority of folks that are incarcerated eventually come back to their communities, come back to a different community. And the reintegration process is difficult enough in itself when you're trying to separate yourself from having lived an existence of being caged, and what that means when you're trying to now be a newly free person. Um, I also have moved away from calling it the criminal justice system and calling it the criminal legal system, because the more I am steeped in this work, the more I realize there is very little justice that actually exists, especially when we're talking about trials. Trials are not fact-finding missions. Trials are what the evidence shows that you can prove in court, regardless of your factual guilt or innocence. So that is something that I spend a very long time with my students as well, where we look at, well, what is justice? What does justice mean? What does it look like? And then throughout the course of the semester, they start to realize, oh, well, if justice is supposed to be this, and the criminal legal system operates in this way, there's a very clear and obvious incongruence there. I am also guilty of having used the term illegal immigrant. I am from a very traditional Latino family. This is what I have heard. My parents immigrated here the right way. We were privileged enough to have resources and means that allowed us the access, the ability to come to this country. Both of my parents come from very large families, and when you have one family member that is here sort of to open the door for you for migrating the proper way, then it makes it easier for the rest of the folks in your family to do that as well. So my entire life, I was under the impression, well, yeah, we were able to do it correctly. You should be too. There should be consequences. And it wasn't until, again, I started getting more steeped into the criminal justice literature where I started realizing how my own personal and professional experiences were causing me to regurgitate the same harmful language and labels that we use onto other people. And then having now worked a little bit closer with Dr. Chaness, and in the criminal justice lexicon, indigenous populations are just not talked about. When you try to look at data that compares folks of an indigenous background, folks who are Black, folks who are Latino, folks of different ethnicities, Native indigenous populations are still woefully underrepresented. I think that the most recent data federally when it comes to indigenous populations is from 2018. The Prison Policy Initiative was able to pull some data, but even that was extremely haphazard because at the federal level, we are just not tracking that in the same way that we are tracking other groups. So coming into this position, when I was teaching the race and criminal justice class, I recognized how, yes, the class is about race specifically, and we all have seen the myriad of research and studies that addresses how the criminal legal system itself is extremely prejudicial, is extremely negatively biased against the status quo. But I just was not well versed in the Native indigenous literature because, again, in my very traditional criminal justice program, these are just not things that we talked about. These were not things that were covered. And it's kind of like this vicious cycle of we don't talk about it because the data's not there, but the data's not there because we don't talk about it. So it's very important for us to be able to recognize how we ourselves are lacking in our training and what we can do to make that even better. My research is in white supremacy. So talking about white supremacy is something that we do in all of my classes. I am very clear and transparent with my students that there is a difference between having bias, having internalized bias. There is a difference of having anyone has the capacity to be anti anything. But when we speak about aspects of racism, racist, for example, a common question that I get is, well, Dr. Duran, is it true that Black people cannot be racist? And I tell them that is 100% true because racism is based off of systems of power. However, Black people can have internalized anti-Blackness. They can have internalized misogyny. They can have internalized xenophobia. That in itself is separate, is very similar to the systems of racism that they're probably traditionally taught, but are not racist in themselves. When we speak about white supremacy, exactly, personal, institutional racism versus personal prejudice. And one of I am very comfortable with using my personal experience to juxtapose what that means in the professional lexicon. So I am of Dominican descent. White supremacy is unfortunately rampant throughout my ancestral upbringing because white supremacy has also created systems of colorism. And that is something that a lot of Caribbean folks, a lot of Afro-Caribbean folks, Afro-Latino folks, anyone who has some sort of Afrocentric ethnic background or ethnic ancestral background will be able to understand that this is, when we speak about racism, this is not a problem that is unique to the United States. This is something that is internalized, that exists in every single social institution. Every single institution has the ability, runs the risk of being overcome, of being overly informed by white supremacy. And even saying the United States, for example, I no longer say America. When I'm speaking about the criminal legal system, I say United States. Because when we talk about America, the Americas are inclusive of not just the United States, but Mexico, Canada, South America, Central America. So when we talk about American ideals, I'm very intentional when I tell my students there is a difference between saying America versus the United States. The United States is one geographical aspect, whereas the Americas is encompasses the totality of that. And a lot of us right now in this time, especially, and I love that Dr. Hannes brought up the social media of things, because I think that as higher education professionals, that is really where we're competing for their source of information. That is where, fortunately, unfortunately, on the one hand, we live in such an interglobal society where we're seeing less gatekeeping around knowledge, but we're also seeing less checks and balances, puns intended, less checks and balances when it comes to the factual aspect of that information. So for me, it's very important that I actually have conversations with them on what they think they know versus how it actually exists. So in my race and criminal justice class, there is kind of like this interactive game that we play. And full disclosure, I did get it off of TikTok. It's called Is This Racist? And we talk about the things that are very normal in our colloquial language and whether or not that is rooted in racism. So I'll give you an example. Something that most of us have probably heard growing up: you better get back home before the street lights cut on. And I asked them, is this something that to you could be rooted in racism? And a lot of students tell me, well, it makes sense. A lot of us grew up in the city. Our parents just wanted us to come home because nothing good happens after dark. And I explained to them, well, that is rooted in sundown towns. And sundown towns, sunset laws were these policies where if you were darker than a certain shade, it was illegal for you to exist after dark, because of what that means, what we attach to, well, what could these people possibly be up to at this time of night? What could you possibly do under the cloak of darkness? And that leads us to much larger conversations on, well, what are the other things that we're saying that we're taking for granted that we probably use very flippantly today? And we don't, yes, and there are some sundown towns that still exist because those laws have not been purged from their state statutes. The state of Mississippi, for example, had anti-miscegenation laws on the books in their legal code until 2013. And now we are at a time where we're told that civil rights are themselves discriminatory practices against the white male supermajority. Speaking of majority, I no longer use minority in my class when it comes to referencing groups that are non-white, non-male, non-heterosexual, non-cisgendered. And this past semester, we actually had a very deep discussion in my larger 101 lecture why I do not use the term minority. And I tell them, well, take 5 minutes right now, use your Google machine that you love to fact check me with, and tell me what percent of the global population is non-white. And non-white individuals make up the global majority. Approximately 85% of the world population is not white. So by calling people of color, by calling other non-white groups minorities, that in itself is a misnomer. And that term is used to imply inferiority. And what I tell them is it is not our job to decide whom or what is inferior to something else, because race in itself is not real. Race is a social construct. It is something you can't, there is no biological test that will determine what race you are. There is a biological test. There are dental exams that can determine your ethnic origin, but ethnicity and race in themselves are two vastly different beings. I get a lot of Latino students who come through who do not understand that aspect of and or. They assume that race and ethnicity are interchangeable. And I'm very honest with them. And I tell them, no, it's not an either or, it's an and. Race is one thing, ethnicity is something else. And as a quantitative methodologist by trade, I cannot tell you how much it hurts me to read a census, for example, and seeing how race and ethnicity are conflated to be the same thing. So someone like me who identifies as an Afro-Latina and is asked to choose between am I Latina or am I Black, I did not recognize my own Blackness until I was 22 years old. And I was sitting in my research methods class at Michigan State University, and I was one of two students of color in that class. And as an example, we were going over the difficulty of measurement in quantitative research. And we were talking about how race and ethnicity are very difficult to measure. And the professor turns to me and says, well, Celi, you understand because you're Black. And I said, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. So there were examples of how my own upbringing was then determining not just how I felt that I belonged in the world, but what that meant for me as I was getting prepared to be an educator, to be in the classroom, to have these conversations with students, and the responsibility that we hold in making sure that our students are not doing the same things that we're doing. I also, after coming here during COVID, I moved to a zero text cost course. I understand that I work in a field where it is possible for me to not assign a textbook that my students do not have to pay for, because for every single topic and subject that I teach, there are at least 2,000 minimum relevant sources that I can pull from, in addition to the fact that I tell my students, I have a PhD, which says that I am an expert in this particular field. You are already paying your tuition dollars to get your expertise, to get your information from an expert. I am not comfortable with also contributing to the exorbitant costs of education. Criminal justice textbooks also, speaking about that power of language, are very complicit in generating the same punitive languages that I'm trying to move away from. So for example, if you open a traditional criminal justice textbook, which MSRP for a criminal justice text for a one-on-one class, the cheapest I have seen is about $60. That's a lot of money for a lot of our students. And I previously in this presentation mentioned that I am the faculty resident mentor for first generation students. I am a first generation student. I, for better or for worse, understand all too well having to put yourself through school when you don't have anyone in the home that can help you, help you navigate these aspects of higher education. During COVID, where we were stuck with everything, I was teaching at BMCC. I had a student that told me, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to drop this course because I cannot afford the book that is being used. And I was going into the library to go get access. I always had it up on the library for when students couldn't get it. And they told me, I do not have the resources right now. The book, the cheapest I can get it for is $90. I can't justify this right now. My parents just got furloughed. We don't know where our next paycheck is coming from. And that was the first time that I realized, oh, I'm doing to my students what was done unto me in terms of creating barriers for their educational success. So I initially stopped using textbooks because of the cost. Then I started working with other folks and I really started looking at the language that was being used. You open a criminal justice textbook, law enforcement, overwhelmingly white men. Criminal defendants, overwhelmingly Black and brown. So then I was using text that was generating what I was trying to teach my students not to do. And by using a zero cost text. Sarah, I'm sorry, what's the correct terminology? Is it zero cost text or zero text cost?
I would say it's zero cost text.
Thank
Different
you.
from, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow up with you after the session. Thank you. What a great champion you are.
So by doing that, not only am I helping my students economically, I'm also garnering better control over what voices, what resources I'm centering in the classroom. So I'm able to use a lot more Michelle Alexander. I'm able to use a lot more Angela Davis. I like, because criminal justice is such an interdisciplinary field, I like bringing in resources from other classes that I know my students are taking. That way they can see how everything is interconnected. What I tell them is, when you study criminal justice, you're studying anthropology. And when you're studying anthropology, you're studying the creation of culture. You're studying the creation of societies, of civilization. I tell them we will be talking about sociology. Whether they like it or not, we will be discussing politics, because you cannot teach anything in the criminal legal realm and not understand how the political landscape is not just going to inform the policies moving forward, but are also going to impact who you are, or how you identify will then impact how you can navigate throughout society. Right now, speaking of language, the Department of Homeland Security has been using a lot of terms that, because I study white supremacy, give me pause for concern. So the promoting of remigration, for example, which is the current administration's way of, I guess, very lightly wanting to say, well, if you hail from this, this, and this, if you did not get here the proper way, then self-deport, or we're trying to move towards less immigration, less migration. And I had very honest conversations with my students just last semester in the 101 class on how we need to pay attention to what they are telling us as they are saying it, especially when you realize that the US society that we are speaking about was built on immigration. It was built on slavery. It was built on the transatlantic slave trade. And I'm very, very clear and intentional when we speak about these things, because, and actually, we just had a couple of chapters published in an anthology where I speak on this specifically, and how in criminal justice research, you cannot take the DEI out of criminal justice research. So when we speak about policing, the very first organized police law enforcement units in this country were slave patrols. So you have to be able to discuss those within the lexicon of the criminal legal system, regardless of how uncomfortable that might make some folks that then conflate and assume that, well, why should I have to be held responsible for what my ancestors did? And I go, that's not what we're doing. Recognizing, acknowledging a truth as it exists is not someone else or another group asking you to take responsibility for that harmfulness, for that toxicity. It's just acknowledging, oh, this is where it's rooted from, this is how it's based. So moving forward, what can we do so we're not repeating those same historical aspects? And that's just a few of the ways that one of the things about, I was just having this conversation with some of my colleagues in my department on how having a PhD working in higher education is such a cognitive dissonance, because on the one hand, you have these degrees, you have these years of experience that say you are an expert in something, but every day I am learning something new, which lets me know I'm not an expert on anything. It's like, it's this idea that you're constantly learning, but also the language is constantly changing. One of the first, I guess, aha moments that I had coming here was a lot of our students still use the term colored people. And for me, that was very difficult for me to confront firsthand, because the first time that it happened, I obviously did not make a big deal about it in the class, and I didn't say this to the students, but internally, I felt like they were insulting me. I felt that it was a personal attack against me. And after I had a conversation with another colleague, I realized it's not a personal attack against you. This is just what they know. And because we are working with students who at times have a very limited worldview, a very limited perspective. And when I was working at John Jay, most of the students that I worked with were non-traditional. It was very common for me to be the youngest person in the room, or I was either teaching 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night. So it was working professionals, people who had a different set of 24 hours. Coming here, I'm working with students who are 18, 17, sometimes as young as 16 years old, and they are just regurgitating their limited worldview on how they have been taught to reference other groups, other peoples, other societies different from themselves. So when we talk about language, I tell students we need to understand that this is the time for us to show grace to ourselves and also to each other, because you cannot assume that someone else is brought up with the same resources, with the same capacity to understand a different identity other than themselves. But that is what college is for. Part of college is, yes, for you to gain knowledge that's going to make you a little bit better of a person than you were before you started, hopefully. But the other part is also that for a lot of our students, this is the first time that they are interacting with vastly different communities, vastly different identities, and what that means for not just how they interact in the classroom, how they see themselves and how they perceive others. In the beginning of the presentation, I had a slide up where in the race and in all of my classes, I tell my students labels matter. So when we look at how the media, for example, you have white criminal defendants. White criminal defendants are overwhelmingly described as who they are in the community in terms of, oh, a father, a son, little league coach, CEO of this, president of that. Black criminal defendants are overwhelmingly described in terms of what they did and not who they are. So it's that bias, sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious way that we dehumanize others that do not meet the status quo. So an exercise that I've done in one of my classes in a way to get them to understand the power of language is I'll give them multiple sources that describe the same case. And then I'll have them record. This is also something that I do in my research methods class for quantitative and qualitative measurement. I'll have them record how are the different defendants described in this media source versus this media source versus this media source, and what does that do? And then the same thing is if we turn it on his head and we looked at victims and who is deserving of victim status versus who is not. One of the reasons why I am very adamant in the language perspective of things is English is not my first language. English is my second language, and there is so much that gets lost in translation when you're going from one to the next. That's something that I've learned, and I think that this gives me a little bit of an advantage, especially for our students who are coming here and they are new English language learners or English is not their native language, is that because words, so many words in the English language are so duplicitous and can have multiple meanings, it's extremely important for us to talk about context and what context means within the conversations that we're having and how that can change how people view themselves, but also how they're perceived by others. I think we lost Michael. Oh, never mind. He's here. And I know that there are some words that Dr. Hannes has tried to move away from, and I'm just going to throw the question back to him now, too.
Honestly, I think we only have a few minutes left,
Oh,
so
yeah.
I would just say, does anyone have any comments or questions themselves? I know John will move us along shortly, but just if we had a few minutes. Feel free to type in the chat or raise your little weird yellow hand or just go off mute and speak into the space.
I
All the
think we
things.
have a question from someone. How are we supposed to determine if we are making our students uncomfortable? So that is a very good question, and I wish I could tell you that I had a concrete answer. In my experience, I've had students directly tell me to my face, I don't like how you said XYZ. It made me feel this way. Um, that only works really in face-to-face instruction when they've seen me all the time. And it's usually towards the middle of the semester when they realize that I'm pretty comfortable with answering any question that they have for me, especially because I know that I'm teaching subjects that are difficult, that are going to lend to difficult conversations. All, other times, it's just a matter of learning how to read the room. I had a situation just this past semester where I was using an example of something that I was speaking about a situation in town and I could see it on the student's face. They were extremely uncomfortable. So I just moved it along. I pivoted. I pretended like I lost my train of thought and then kept it moving. But then I reached out to the student directly. Sometimes they'll let you know, sometimes they won't. But it's really just a matter of, I would say, the transparency starts from the beginning of the semester and letting students know to let you know, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not Miss Cleo. I don't know what I don't know. You're only human at the end of the day.
I would just add to that just in 10 seconds. I have a journal assignment, and that's where I hear all this feedback.
Mm,
Not at the end of the semester on my course evaluations. Like I know when I'm making students feel uncomfortable, or I know when I'm making students feel a certain kind of way, to use their language, because they tell me in their open-ended journal assignment.
Yeah, I would just add too the midterm evaluation is a great tool for anyone who cares about their teaching, but especially for junior faculty, because
yeah.
cynically, you don't want that end of the semester to be the first time they get to say anything. They're really unhappy and they let it out midterm. Things do get better, and in an anonymous midterm, then you can catch some of those things and not
Yeah.
wait till the end. And then a mini way to do it is I'll make a push for the iClicker because the iClicker allows by questions can be anonymous. So
Yes, I do that
in an
too.
iClicker session, you can have questions that are actually scored, and then you can have a question and set it anonymous, right? And they are. And so you can ask for some real-time feedback about, and you can have an open-ended phrase about how this make you feel or whatever. Do you think it was handled correctly? What feedback do you give me? Almost like an exit ticket. So we actually have some tools for some frequent feedback that can be anonymous. When students do tell you they feel uncomfortable, I have come to see that in my 30th year as the ultimate, an ultimate credit to your teaching to you as a teacher because they felt comfortable enough to tell you no matter what that they weren't unhappy. I mean, maybe they were angry enough, but we have colleagues that say things not accidentally that are pretty appalling, and the students will never tell them because they expect retaliation, right? So I would say that.
Yeah. Yeah, in my larger lecture, I have a TA that monitors the anonymous question poll. So when I don't have as many hands, I'll turn to the TA and we usually get better questions there. Oh, I think Ramin has a question.
I just wanted to make a point. I was a foreign student for a very long time, and somehow I became an international student. So I just want to say this. Uh, it really didn't bother me that I was called a foreign student. I was a foreigner and I was in another country, came here to go to school. Somehow people have a perception of what could offend someone. and it's not always accurate. I mean, I don't think I was a different person when people decided I was an international student. I still needed the 920 to be in this country. So it didn't really make any difference whatsoever to me. And the language didn't bother me. So I think, we have to be very careful about this assumption about the way people will take language that someone decided was maybe offensive. I don't know why I became an international student. I was perfectly happy being a foreign student.
All right. I think that is our time, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you, everyone, for spending your Tuesday morning with us.
Thank you, everyone, on behalf of John.